Okay. Hello and welcome everyone to the 2022 Planetary Health Annual Meeting at Harvard University. You're now joining our concurrent session on November 2nd. It will be moderated by Walter Speck, and it is looking at examples from the Dutch top sector. Walter?
Thanks very much. Hello, everybody. This morning, in the plenary session, there was a question by the moderator to the panelists, what are you scared about? And somebody said, I'm scared about the next phase we have to enter. So I went to him and asked him, but what are you scared about? Because implementation is fun. That's something we would like to convey to you today, this message, by giving you an example from the Netherlands, from a policy perspective, from an industry perspective, but also from a scientific perspective. This is known as the Dutch polder model, which is a continuous dialogue between policymakers, people from industry, people from society, and science. It's not easy, but it helps to get things going. But before we start, and I introduce the panelists to you, I want to show you some of our thoughts over the last 4 years before we even learned about the Planetary Health Alliance. And we were working, what are our biggest questions? Now let me see if this comes. Again, my name is Wouter Speck, and I come from the domain of personalized medicine. So something completely different. And if you look at the challenges we have in health and well-being, you can read them here. It's what Leroy Hood from Seattle calls P4 medicine: preventive, predictive, personalized, participatory medicine, prevention. In the Netherlands, we spend 100 billion a year on healthcare, only 1.5% on prevention. Now you can do the math here. The question is, how can we raise that? And that's not simple, because there are systemic failures, you might say, which hamper that. Value-based healthcare. What do you get for your money? Also an important issue and discussing not only in the Netherlands, but all over Europe and worldwide. The fight against non-communicable diseases, especially diabetes and obesity, which is a widespread disease. I think somewhere around 50% of the world population is affected by the disease, which is also known as something of the welfare state disease. You get a lot of food, and that's not good. And finally, the pandemics, I don't have to explain that to you. We all have witnessed one in our lifetime. But if you go further and you look at the challenges and the questions around food, then you see suddenly, okay, this is about nutrition, nutritious food. This is about plant-based ingredients versus animal proteins. This is about food security. How can we make sure that everybody getting access to food, which is also called food for all. And it's about the primary production. How do we produce our food? But then again, there's a third element, which is the environment. And where we see that we are, and we have learned that again the last 2 days about the planetary boundaries we are facing. Sustainability issue, the element of circular economy, biodiversity, and the climate. And if you look closely, you see that these are all interrelated, because dietary intake will determine whether you get obese, yes or no. But if you talk about the diet, you also talk about sustainable production. So we feel that all these things are interrelated. And this is our challenge, what we call the food, health, and environment continuum. But there's more. Technologies are important. Key digital technologies are important. But what is mostly forgotten are the social sciences and humanities, equally important to get things rolling. Now, this is a challenge, because these are all different people coming from all different backgrounds, and you want them in the room and to talk together on solutions, not only a solution somewhere in the upper corner left. This is something else. This is a mathematical equation. It's not, but it's a representation. What is health? And the first line I got from Professor Peter van der Spek from the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam. He says, health is determined by your genome. I added the microbiome, because I think it's equally important. It's your lifestyle and your environment. Now, you can't CRISPR-Cas your own DNA. I wouldn't do that. Your environment, well, you live where you live, but your lifestyle, that's something you could control yourself. And then what is lifestyle? And again, it's your exercise, both mentally and physically. It's your behavior and your dietary intake. And there you see where the connection is between food and health, for instance. And this is how we go a step further, and this is where we end up towards the Planetary Health Alliance, where we say, if you take that carefully, you see we're talking about the healthcare system. We're talking about the food system. But we also talk about the social domain. And we think that somewhere there is the link towards planetary health. And that's a little bit where we were discussing the last 4 years. And then, like I said before, we came in contact with the Planetary Health Alliance, which comes from a different angle. We come from another angle. So, like I said before in my introduction, we want to now showcase some examples of the approach we are taking in the Netherlands to work on this. And the first in line is Michiel Roelse. He is Executive Vice President of the top sector in the Netherlands. He will explain everything about that, because you might say, what the hell is that? But that's his problem. He is what we call a typical manager. In the positive sense, I would say, because he manages both policymakers, but also funding instruments to get the things going. And like I said before, this is about public-private partnerships and public-private partnerships. He looks at, and that's interesting, he looks at operational effectiveness. And again, I let him explain what he's doing. And he represents one of the big policy domains in the Netherlands, like I said, the top sector, health, horticulture, and starting materials. Michiel, may I invite you to replace me?
Thank you. Thank you, Wouter. Yeah, it's true, I admit it, I'm a manager. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a researcher. I like to manage things. I like to make sure that things run smoothly. Yeah, so the door's locked, so you can't get out. You'll be stuck with me. Let's see what it does. Okay, this is me. An introduction to the top sector, horticulture and starting materials. There's two terms in there that I'd like to explain. First is the top sector, and next is horticulture and starting materials. Let's start with the last one. I'll give you some seconds to read this. Horticulture basically has to do with all plant-based chains. It's a very broad field. It's vegetables, it's fruits, it's production, it's technology, it's logistics, everything having to do anything with food production, especially vegetables and fruits. Like I said, it's a broad sector. There's lots of different subsectors there. And this is what we do as a top sector. Now, first, let me explain that the Dutch model that is featured so heavily in the introduction has a very specific origin. The last year of the Second World War was a terrible year for us because there was widespread famine. People were dying of starvation. And after the war in the early 50s, the Dutch government said, we're not ever going to let that happen again. We're going to make sure that we're self-supportive, self-sufficient in terms of food production. And they made the choice to say, okay, healthy food production, so vegetables and fruits. They invested lots of money into Wageningen University, which is still, I think, the best green university in the world. They also invited companies to join them, and that was quite revolutionary because usually scientists and government officials and industry officials don't really mix together that well. So that was very, very visionary of the Dutch government, and we've perfected that approach into what we call the triple helix. I think it's well known over the world now, meaning combining and aligning the efforts of industry, government, and knowledge institutions, usually universities. That's called, now we call that the top sector approach. That started in 2011 as a new industry policy by the Dutch government, where they said, okay, we're facing a lot of very multidimensional challenges. How are we going to solve that? And at the same time, and we're Dutch, how can we make some money from finding solutions? So it's combining both working towards solutions for societal challenges and seeing if there maybe is a revenue model for the industry at the horizon to see, okay, let's join in, to make it interesting for them to join. A top sector is a part of the Dutch economy that is very fundamental to the success of our country. There are 9. It's not surprising that water management is probably the most well-known. Agriculture, but also chemistry, creative industry, and like I said, horticulture. The Dutch government in 2011 selected 9 top sectors based on 3 criteria. One is they should be global leaders, or at least have the ambition and potential to lead globally in their respective field. The second is they should be very research intensive, meaning the quality and quantity of the research done within the sector is crucial to the continuing success of the sector. And the third criteria is, of course, the numbers game, number of people employed, number of companies, revenue, added value to the Dutch economy. So horticulture is one of the 9 top sectors. And what we do, every top sector has a bureau, which I'm the executive director of, to foresee in the operational way of working within the top sector. What we do mostly is shown on this slide. Basically, our major tasks are setting up a joint research and innovation agenda with government, industry, and knowledge institutions. And the second is we have a budget to fund our own research projects. And just before I got on the plane towards Boston, I signed off on another 100 million for, I think, 85 new projects for the next 4 years. So it's agenda setting, but not just talking about, also funding and getting the projects to their conclusion. Let's see what the next slide. I'm not used to PowerPoint. I just talk and randomly flip and see what comes up. Well, in figures, I think we just covered this before. It's interesting to note that if you see there's almost 24,000 companies within the horticultural sector, most of them are family-owned small SMEs. So there are some large multinationals, I think about a dozen, but most of the people that I work with have small companies. Let's see what the next one is. I like this one. Well, this is self-explanatory, I think. And of course, the Dutch government implemented this strategy to make sure that the areas of the Dutch economy that were global leaders or potential global leaders are reinforced in their efforts to remain so, or even extend that position. I think that's enough about this slide. Let's see. Mostly what we do most of the time is financing, initiating cooperations between government, industry, and knowledge institutions. Research and innovation agenda I just mentioned. So we have I think we have about 400 to 500 projects at this moment running. But we also direct efforts towards education, because we're also very aware of the fact that research is of course a wonderful thing, but if nobody uses the results of your research, then it's more like a paper tiger, as we say. We also work on internationalization, of course, and the Impact 2025 program is something that I will say more over later. This is mainly our the instruments that we use. Public-private partnerships, of course, seed money projects, which are very small projects for companies to see if there's anything. So I'm not sure if this will work, but if you can give me 50,000 euro, I can find out more. That's what we call seed money projects. The MIT is not the MIT in Massachusetts, but it's the Dutch Innovation Reinforcement Program for small SMEs. So where we give small companies the chance to work together on research questions that they may have, very geared towards application, while most of the research that we fund is fundamental in nature or industrial in nature. Of course, we work together with the Dutch Research Council, which is the organization for fundamental research in the Netherlands, and the European Union. Like I said, for us, research is important, but also the fact what's the impact of research. That's something that interests me hugely personally. Coming from the question that I think every organization should ask itself, which is what are we doing and for who are we doing that? And then, of course, the next question is what could we be doing, but we're not, and for whom are we not doing that? It turned out that from a study into our network that our scope, our reach did not extend towards students below the academic level. So I think you would call that vocational. We did not have any impact on those. The really small SMEs, the companies that struggle to survive, who have no budget for innovation, don't see the need for innovation, and another very important group, startups and scale-ups. So we developed, together with Wouter, I developed a program called Impact 25 to address those groups that our usual operations do not reach. And then the reason that we wanted to come here, there is a certain effectiveness to being organized in silos, because that's what we basically have been doing. This sector. Once you do, that's very effective if you address challenges within your respective silo. But there will be a moment that you want to do this. That's very, very complicated. So it took us a few years to get a working connection with most of the other top sectors. But we've been very successful working with logistics. We've been very successful working with water. And the one that Wouter alluded to earlier in his presentation is with life science and health, the medical top sector. Why is it hard to get to a point, to get to a position where they said, okay, we're going to invite you to join us? Because as Wouter said, prevention was only a very small percentage of their focus. And when you talk about prevention, it's lifestyle, it's exercise, but it's, for a large part, it's healthy eating, vegetables and fruits. The Netherlands are the second largest exporter of vegetables and fruits. But when it comes to actual intake of vegetables and fruits in the Netherlands, we are somewhere at the bottom in Europe, which is surprising, but that's something that we want to work on. And like I said, healthy foods are an integral part of prevention. So we're very happy to work together closely with the top sector, life science and health. In fact, we have a joint roadmap and also some joint resources. Food, health, and living environment, because we're not only producing vegetables and fruits, we also produce shrubs, trees, and a green environment is very good for not just for water stress, heat stress, but also for personal well-being. I mean, if you go outside, and you're able to go into a park and do some jogging or something, that's very different from being in an industrial environment. It's very crucial to your well-being. We also do that with the top sector Agri and Health, which is agriculture. 4 action lines have been developed, and I'm mainly focusing for my part of the deal on action line 4, the knowledge platform, where we try to exchange views and new insights with researchers from the medical side of things, and also bring our own insights to the table when it comes to them. But also we have ways of making sure that the research projects and the results are really being utilized in action line 4. We have healthy schools because we think healthy eating starts at the elementary schools. If you teach them how to eat healthy, they will continue to do that for the rest of their lives. And of course, action line 3, the healthy region. We're just a very small country, but we have a very strong regional organizational bias. So a region can be very instrumental in working on health and healthy eating. And I think that's my story. Thank you so much.
Let me see, before I go to Yara, maybe the lesson learned here is that if you have an idea and you want to get it executed, you can develop programs where people can join in. And that's the reason why we want to showcase to you. There are other ways to do it. But I think listening into the conference these 2 days, this might be a route also for the Planetary Health Alliance. How would you do that then? because you need money. I told it the first day, 3 important elements, and I don't want to repeat it, but that's important, right? If you want to spread the ideas, yeah, you need funding for that. And this is a way how at least policymakers and politicians, in his case, understand that it is worthwhile to put money in. So maybe some things to pick up. So this is something different than a Dutch street. This is real what we would like to do with you. So the next speaker is Yara van den Boogaarde. She comes from industry. I don't know if this is the enemy here, but for me it's not, at least. And it was mentioned also this morning that we have to reach out to industry as well. So here's Yara. She works as BASF, Vegetable Feeds Business, as a scientist for co-innovation. And she's responsible for multidisciplinary teams. And you will hear that often in our talks. It's about collaboration, multidisciplinarity, not the usual suspect, but even the unusual suspect. She has a background in biotechnologies and also experience in seed breeding industry. And is also their idea that they will drive the developments in healthy, enjoyable food, but also sustainable. So I think there's the connection. Yara? Go ahead.
Thank you, Wouter. It's a pleasure to be here today. Well, like Wouter said, I'm from the industry, hopefully not the bad guy, but we'll see in a minute. And what I'll be talking about is our vegetable seeds business, BASF's vegetable seeds business. What I want to do today is kind of illustrate how, from an industrial perspective, these kind of collaborations, these public-private collaborations that Michiel was just talking about can really benefit us, can benefit our partners, and can also benefit society. So a little bit about what we do and why we do it. So our motivation, and that's why we go to our work every day, is making healthy eating enjoyable and sustainable. From an enjoyability perspective, we try and produce vegetables that taste well and that have great texture. We also try and make them as healthy as possible. We all know that eating vegetables is very important because it's good for your health, but if we can make them even healthier, that would be even better. So we do quite some nutritional research on making our vegetables healthier, and we actually also fund quite some nutritional research. Come back to that in a minute, but that also illustrates a little bit of that partnership with other parties. And then, of course, the sustainability part. For us, sustainability is a must-have. Producing sustainability, in a sustainable way, it helps us, it helps our customers, it helps the consumer, and it helps the planet. So I'll come back to that in a minute as well. But first, a bit about our outreach, so you understand why trying to make our healthy eating enjoyable and sustainable is so important. So here, what we touch on a yearly and on a daily basis, we produce 200 billion seeds on a yearly base, and that actually translates to 50 billion kilograms of vegetable on a yearly base. And I am aware that kilograms may not always be as easy, but bear with me. That translates to 137 million kilograms of vegetables daily, and that means that we touch 500 million consumers' lives on a daily basis, 500 million people. So you can imagine that we actually have quite some impact here. And because we have such impact for us, we understand the responsibility that we have, how important it is to produce vegetables that are healthy, but that are also sustainable. And we try and do this in a sustainable framework. So we resource responsibly. We work with suppliers, for instance, that don't do child labor. And I mean, it's 2022. It's horrible that this is something that we have to actively pursue, but it is fact of life. One of the things that we think are very important from a corporate responsibility point of view, but also from a human point of view. We produce efficiently and safely for people and for the environment. One of the ways that we do this, as an example, is sourcing biodegradable mulch instead of non-degradable mulch. A simple way to be more sustainable, to operate in a more sustainable way, and therefore produce our vegetables more sustainable. And then we drive sustainable solutions. We do this together with our customers. We do this together with different parties. Examples here are breeding for resistance. It's a great way actually to reduce chemical use, which is better for growers. It's healthier for them. It's obviously healthier for our consumers, and it's also healthier for the planet. So a very key thing. So basically what we try and do is respect and treat people with value, treat the planet with value. And I hope that by giving you a couple of examples that illustrates how we try and achieve that. Well, a little bit more about our data, our facts and figures. We have 24 different crops that we work on. You can see them over here: lettuce, carrot, tomato, cucumber. They have a global outreach. We do have a couple of crops that we have a little bit more of a local focus. For instance, okra, which is has a heavier focus on India. And within these 24 different crops, we have over 1,200 different crop varieties. And these crop varieties are tailored depending on consumers' preferences in a local market. But once again, it shows, the impact that we have and the responsibility that we have. So I hope this gives you a bit more insight on what we do, but we don't do this alone. Although we have quite some outreach, we do realize that we have to actually do this together to improve our products, to make them healthy, to make them enjoyable, to make them sustainable. And to do that, we do this ideally with as many parties as possible. It's because, doing this together with different partners, and I'll show you a couple of examples in a minute, it helps us gain more impact. It also helps us gain more knowledge and more know-how. And it's actually shown that interacting with your peers, so interacting with either your direct competitors, but also with your value chain partners, greatly improves the quality of work that you can deliver. And so for us, it's a very key thing to work on this. I actually listed a couple of examples here, and I'll run through them very quickly, but just to give you an idea of what kind of projects an industrial party can work on, what we enjoy to work on together with our partners. So the first one is actually developing greenhouses, which is something that, we work in greenhouses, developing greenhouses in a more sustainable way. And we do this by using smart and adaptable materials. Although we don't produce greenhouses ourselves, understanding how they can be produced more sustainably helps us to optimize how we can produce our crops in a more sustainable way under those circumstances. And it also helps us to transfer that knowledge to growers that may not be in this project. So it actually goes beyond the people, the parties that are in this project. It's a wonderful example where we collaborate with parties that are more on the material development part. The second one is actually an example where we collaborate with our value chain parties. So here we're focusing on developing protocols to improve the nutritional value. I already told you, right? If we can produce vegetables that are healthier, that's healthier for the consumers, and that also leads to a healthier environment. So here what we're trying to do is collaborate with different parties in the value chain. You can think of processors, you can think of greenhouse development companies, you can think of retailers. What we try to do is optimize growing conditions, optimize the protocols, both during growing and post-harvest to, for instance, improve your carotenoid levels in carrots. Third example that I have is on sustainable onion production. So what we try and do is breed for MH independent onion varieties. MH is a chemical. So this is a wonderful example of how to actually reduce your chemical use. If we are able to breed for varieties that are independent, the grower doesn't have to be using these chemicals as frequent, and ideally not at all anymore. And then the last one is about investigating physiological and biochemical processes that are involved in water loss. So what we're trying to do here is see in this specific project, how can we actually retain water in the products so you can improve the shelf life and therefore reduce your food waste. But you could also extend this to how can we actually reduce using the amount of water, which in some parts of the world is quite key. So you can understand that it's also about climate adaptation, not only about how do we prevent more climate change. So these are just a couple of very tangible examples of how an industrial player like us really loves to collaborate with different parties. and they go quite broad. So we collaborate both with corporates, but we also collaborate with SMEs, we collaborate with startups, and then obviously also with academic parties. And we're not an exception here. There are quite some companies that do it that way. I think it really benefits, like I said, both the companies, the parties that are in these projects, but also on a wider audience, companies and parties that are not in the project, and also eventually, you know, other people's lives. So thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yara. That was very concise. You can see that she masters telling a story. But again, it's about collaboration. And that's I keep stressing that's one of the key messages we have. So we had a policymaker, we had an industry. Let's turn to science. But I'm not sure if we are turning to science, yes or no. Because our next speaker is actually a strategic science communicator, which was also mentioned the last 2 days, that it is very important. How do you communicate? Fred Balvert, because he's also representing the Erasmus Medical Center, but also the Convergent Alliance, which is a collaboration between Technical University Delft, the Erasmus University, and the Erasmus Medical Center. Again, collaboration. He has also numerous positions abroad. So he's not only working in Rotterdam, but he has been working both in Germany and in Italy, in a place I visited last week, but you weren't there. In public communication of science and technology and such issues. So, Fred, the floor is yours. Tell us a little bit your story.
Thank you very much, Wouter. It's a pleasure to be here, and it was a great pleasure to listen to all your talks during this conference. It's a good thing of being in the end of the program that you are informed by many of the talks. I could not see them all, of course. And one common message, I think, that has become very clear is that our planet is facing challenges that cannot be tackled from one discipline. I remember when I started in science communication, our scientists were looking for the gene for cancer, and we thought if we find this gene, then cancer is cured. But it's not like that, and as Wouter showed us, it's genetics, it's lifestyle, but it's also the environment, and how can you possibly, from your individual point of view, change the environment. The good news is, and we also witnessed that in this conference, that scientists are climbing out of their silos and their ivory towers, even taking a sort of activist stance and say, listen, we have to get to impact from our research. I think this is happening in a lot of places in the world. Oh, we can skip a few. And in the Netherlands, we have a small country with quite a density of universities. And 3 of those universities, Erasmus MC, which is the medical center where I work, the Technological University of Delft, and Erasmus University, where you have the social sciences and humanities, have teamed up in the Convergence. And the idea is we always are talking about collaboration between engineering, life sciences, social sciences. Why not really structurally work together? Maybe this will turn out into a merger in the end, and we will have this will cause a lot of problems and protests, but let's just do it and not sit and wait. And this convergence really being sped up because the boards of the 3 institutes also said that they're going to put their strategic budgets into this convergence, inviting researchers to come up with joint projects from the 3 universities, respecting each other's views. We've seen the corona pandemic. I think we need the technology there, but also the social sciences. In fact, it is from a virology point of view, a logical, even quite expectable problem. Science can also deliver at least part of the solution by coming up with vaccination and analysis of the virus. But in fact, that is where the problems started, with the vaccination and inviting people to get their vaccinations, trying to get it accepted. There's so much more than just the purely scientific approach. So this idea of the convergence was pushed further by the pandemic that happened. And one of the flagship projects is the Pandemic and Disaster Preparedness Center. Here you see the leadership team, a virologist, Marion Koopmans, hydraulic engineer, Bas Jonkman, sociologist, Wil Dijkstra, and Anja Schreier from public health. Because this also, what they discovered is that Marion, as a virologist, is trying to prevent pandemics, while at the same time, Bas Jonkman as a hydraulic engineer, is trying to prevent floods. And one of the solutions to prevent floods is to make areas of land that can be flooded in a controlled way. So that's the solution for flooding. On the other hand, you're inviting all kinds of mosquitoes, which, especially by global warming, can find it in these flooded areas a new habitat and cause new pandemics. So if they do not work together, there is a big problem. Well, I already mentioned the social sciences, which are important for acceptance of the science, the public health measures, etc. So this about pandemics, and in fact you see that a lot of those factors behind the pandemic, the demographics, the livestock, is also related to problems like flooding, other disasters. So you have to look at those problems in an integrated way. So the same drivers for pandemics do also play a role in flooding. You see some water-related disasters here. Many we know of from the media. And you also see the damage in financial and human life that they cause. And climate change, as well as population growth, is one of the causes of those, both of the disasters. So here you see some of the disciplines that are brought in from those three universities and that can all play a role. A very interesting project that I would like to mention as an example is the surveillance of viruses in the sewage system in the Netherlands. There was this idea, if we can trace viruses within the sewage system, we will know even before GPs or people themselves know that they are ill, because the concentration of viruses will rise in the sewage system. To do this, you need engineering. You need to find out how to find those viruses in the sewer system. You need a virology to understand what virus it is. You need the genetics to sample them and see if there are any new varieties there. The bioinformatics. You need public health studies, the epidemiology, and in fact the hydraulic engineering, robotics to send in robots into the sewage systems. But also the sociology, what will people do if we can predict what is going to happen in an area. And a very interesting side of that is that we also thought maybe if we are able to predict local outbreaks, we can also take local measures in terms of lockdowns, local lockdowns, so that parts of the economy can be out of these measures, and we can keep the economy rolling while at some points there are restrictions. The pandemic lasted long, but not long enough to find out if this is possible. I mean, it is a small country, and of course it is the question remains if it would work if you say, okay, parts of the country are locked down now as soon as we see these levels of virus increase in the... But it definitely makes clear that we need all those disciplines and that we can find new creative solutions. So it was a spin-off, in fact, of this first idea that I showed of the flooding on the one hand and the pandemic. People come together from different disciplines and also find new solutions. So I think, what you see here, the origin, the development, fundamental understanding of a disaster or a pandemic on the one hand. On the other hand, the impact on humans and society. We also saw that society is unpredictable itself. You can feed the information, but even by feeding the information, the behavior will change. So it's not even that is a static model. Were a lot of comments on the graphs that we saw on television predicting outbreaks, and then people said, yeah, there was no outbreak. It's because the measures were taken and you're influencing the outcome. And I think that is an aspect of social sciences that is hardly seen in the more exact sciences as the virology, for example. So we learn a lot from that, and the same lessons can be applied in the water and climate related disasters. So from this pandemic, actually the pandemic and disaster preparedness center was born, and it focuses now on the first 5 front-runner projects, which all deal with the complex aspects of the pandemic. So the first one is climate change and increased risk of vector-borne virus outbreaks. The second is when do viruses become airborne, what is needed for that, and what are the risks that it will happen anytime soon with new viruses coming from animals. But also pandemic lessons for flood disaster preparedness. As was in my first example of the preventing of flooding. Then we can bring in the social sciences for the social and urban resilience. And of course, the integrated early warning surveillance methods and tools. Those are the first 5 front-runner projects of the Pandemic and Disaster Preparedness Center. There's a webinar about each of them, and you see here the link to the webinars. I'm not sure if the presentations will be shared.
They'll be up on our website. So
Okay.
yes.
So behind every front-runner project, there is a team of scientists, multidisciplinary scientists, and they present their front-runner projects in those webinars. And here you see the partners of each front-runner project. This also connects with the former speakers, the way we try to do things in the Netherlands. Wouter called it the polder model. It has to do with our history of poldering. And one thing is certain, it takes time to get to solutions, often more time than in the more autocratic countries. But on the other hand, the solutions that are made are often better and already accepted by all the stakeholders. So here you see the front-runner projects and the partners involved. You see the engineers from Deltares, for example, the Wageningen University. I think there are some people from Wageningen here. It's the agricultural university, but also the Meteorology Institute, Naturalis, which is a museum, but also a science expert center. And that's for each project. Here the municipality of Rotterdam is involved, also the government. And well, it also illustrates the way we try to collaborate with partners from the government, industry and science. On the left you see the expertise that is involved with the scientists who are part of the Pandemic and Disaster Preparedness Center. So that's it. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks very much, Fred. Well, I don't have to repeat what I said before, but you have listened quite well that he does the same. Any questions from the audience? Is there something missing? Go ahead.
So I have several questions. I hope. One is actually very basic and fundamental, and I apologize if I missed it at the beginning. So when you talk about top sector,
Yes.
Is it its own entity?
Yes.
Okay, so it's an entity or organization unto itself that brings in all these components.
It's actually on two different levels. One is the subsector of the Dutch economy, and within that, the beating heart of that is a bureau that sort of takes care of the operational side of things. So it's also an entity.
Got it, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, because another question I have is, I mean, I think it's so wonderful and great that you're bringing these things together and can actually make progress rather than get jammed up in conversation. But something that I've heard when I've worked with some private sector colleagues for trying to operationalize planetary health is what are the incentive structures either within a business potentially and or the enabling environment out in the greater world, which would be the regulatory or legislative mechanisms, because they find that an institution might want to implement sort of planetary health operations, you know, from procurement all the way through end of life and how they actually do their business. But there are either structural changes, structural barriers within their organization, but also in society. And so how have you been able to address that within your industries and then within, I guess, the Netherlands, and then maybe further out? How do you influence that in other parts of the world?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, that's a very good question, and in a way, we are lucky to have been active in a sector that already incorporated the triple helix from the start. So there was a very clear incentive then to say, okay, let's join and do this together, and we've sort of maintained that approach. But some of the work that I do is in managing conflicts of interest, because if you have universities and companies and government, there will be opposing interest, and I think the trick is to find that is okay. Just acknowledge that you come from different perspectives, you want to go in different directions maybe, but there is also always a joint, some common ground to be found. And the trick is for public-private partnerships who work is to find that common ground. Okay, the government, and besides, you have different wishes maybe, but also you can bring different things to the table. The government can provide an enabling environment, you know, in regulations, financial backing, funding of research, which is basically removing some of the risk for the companies in going in a particular research direction. The companies can bring their aptitude and their knowledge of bringing things to market, actually utilizing the results of the projects, which is very important. And for the universities, funding is, of course, a key to. I just said we have 100 million in new projects starting next year. 50% of that 100 million comes from private origin, meaning companies. So you build the triple helix approach into the start of the project. You don't say, okay, this is a project. How can we interest the government? Or no, it's joint agenda setting. So you jointly try to define research questions and say, okay, the universities can add this, the companies, most of them have a spectacular research and development department, can add this, and as a government we can maybe look at regulations for once the results will be implemented. So you build those opposing interests into the start of the project, instead of doing the project and then seeing, okay, what's the next step? Utilization is already built into the whole process. And it takes a lot of time, and I found that it's a movement that needs to grow, because in the beginning it was very difficult. But I've had a network analysis done last year, and we now have a network of almost 8,000 companies, and we could also see that the level and quality the quantity and quality of the interactions within the network getting stronger every year. So, and that's because of trust. That's probably the most important thing, to establish trust between the different sides and say, okay, I know you're coming from a different perspective, but I just know that we're going to get there in the end. You're going to find what you want, and I'm going to get what I want.
I think what is important here is that you face the difficulties at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because like Michiel said, you can go ahead and then suddenly something happens and then you don't know what to do. So by upstream in the process, address the difficulties, which takes a long time. You gain at the end of the process when the outcomes are there, but also when the implementation is there and when the impact is there, you gain time. So investing in that relationship and in that trust is an essential element. And I realized these 2 days that we have in Europe, we are, of course, fortunately, that we have money available, especially for this kind of partnerships. So for science, there's money. For scientists, there's money. For innovation, there's money. There's even money for implementation. So we're very lucky that the funding is is not our worry right now, because we know it's there. We just have to find the right box. So we can concentrate, okay, what do we want to achieve? And this integration at the beginning, I think that's the key to the success of the top sector approach, because it's a policy which is already there for 10 years, which is also not normal. Normally policies, 4 years, new politicians, new policy, etc., etc. But now it's already there for 10 years, so it seems to work. And maybe it's working now differently than in the beginning, but now it's in a state where you can evolve. But maybe, sorry.
Probably it is also streamlining the research agenda. So the research funding is very much aligned with the top sector, and thus setting the agenda.
But it's like you said, Fred, it's very important to have some flagship projects, especially at the beginning of the whole process, that show the potential success of this approach. We've had some very successful projects at a really early stage that showed companies and the other parties say, okay, maybe this can work. Maybe we should investigate. And then it's crucial to have an organization like my office that can facilitate and accommodate parties that want to work together.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Yeah, I know we are running out of time, but you give the signal when we really have to stop. So, please.
It's a dream, right?
No, it's reality. We can make it real for you. Yeah.
And I keep wondering what might be the initial conditions that made it possible to try to identify what might not be the conditions, like in my country, Brazil. What has been the tipping point? What was maybe the role of your office in terms of making the connections,
Yep.
eliminating the barriers, or trying to low down the barriers? Because I see many, despite of, probably the partners might see the benefits of that, but they also see the barriers and the difficulties. Timing, different agendas, competing interests, etc. What made that happen? Was it incentives? Was like a vision, like a vision of the future, the need to do that, all of that?
I think it's all of those, a communal vision of the future and how that can be approached and realized. But I think what you alluded to is I had the same discussion with the party from Mexico, and they said, well, we don't trust each other, we don't trust the government, if you don't have trust, this is not going to work. And trust has to be built. It will slowly grow and grow and grow once you have some successful projects. And I think an impartial party like my office says, I'm not government, I'm not industry, I'm not university, but I'm here to accommodate you, to help you bring it together, and bringing transparency to the process. I think that was the major tipping point. Because it's not three parties colliding. It's three parties joined by a fourth one saying, okay, let's do this together. What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? I'll make sure you get whatever it is that you need, if practical. And let's get started.
And if from the point of view of each specific sector, like universities that can collaborate with it, they do compete as well. So even bringing one sector together is a challenge, right? The industries as well and so on.
It is true. I mean, the
That's true.
universities also compete. And
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Go ahead.
exactly what I wanted to say.
So it's not just the, I mean, what you see is the outcome, and it doesn't mean there have never been any problems. And, yeah, try to find a common ground and work from that instead of the differences that you may have.
But there is fierce competition between project proposals.
Yeah.
So we have an annual call for proposal. There's fierce competition
Then you
between
need
universities.
transparency again, because otherwise it goes to this person.
I think mutual commitment, transparency and trust, that's probably the most important.
I got some other questions here. Go ahead.
So
And then
who originally funds your office?
The government.
That's government.
Yeah.
So somebody in the government sees the big picture and says,
Yeah.
take this money, start to make it happen.
Yeah.
That's you.
That's basically that.
And you have authority to do that with transparency pulling from all the
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in Brazil you could compare it to FAPES, what FAPES is doing in Sao Paulo. Also, yeah, making the research budget, well, in a way instrumental to economic competitiveness, and we see it in the EU as well. There are sometimes some tensions over there as well, because you also have the curiosity-driven sciences, and you must make sure that you accommodate them as well.
So you said this has been going on for 10 years, right? And I think about like a country like the U.S. where 10 years ago, I believe Obama was in office starting his second term, and then we had Trump, and now we're at Biden. Those are three wildly different presidencies. So in a country, I don't know the exact political system of the Netherlands, but I assume that you are like similar to other European countries. Maybe you have multiple parties, not a two-party system.
Yeah.
How do you maintain this throughout multiple regimes, multiple parties coming through?
Well, there is a relative political stability in the Netherlands, because we understand as a trading nation how important that is. So there have been. I'm not saying anything about Italy. But we've had the same prime minister for 10 years, I think. But that's inconsequential, because this policy, the roots of this policy was even before that.
And the difference is, if you look after the Second World War, and you look at every period of time, there's not much difference in policy, even if the left wing were in charge, or the Christian Democrats. So, and that's the reason, like Michiel said, the Dutch are very pragmatic. We know we are a very small company. We are traders by and for, so we just have to make clear you have to buy this from us and then it's fine. So it's also a very pragmatic way, and working with the waves there are. But yesterday somebody, or Monday, Emmanuel from Nigeria came to me and said, what should I do with Nigeria? I said, well, I don't know, but there is a bilateral between the EU and Nigeria. You can use that as a leverage maybe to try to organize something. And of course for me that is very normal to say these things. I have all these things in my head, but there are possibilities, maybe even, we have a big cooperation with Brazil, that we use those bilateral agreements to help you to be a little bit more further away from the government and try to do it that way. So there are, and you couldn't call them tricks, but maybe there are possibilities we should try to engage more by using systems which are there for your benefit, because you can't go the other way around, and that might be also a way to go. But of course the alliance could also then play a role in trying to figure out how could we do that, and who should we get on board who are knowledgeable about these possibilities, because then we can try to venture out. Because I think it's like, I know Fred was telling, but also Jara was telling, you need flagships or lighthouse or whatever you want to call these projects, where we all agree this could be the showcases to where we show what the Planetary Health Alliance wants to go for. And I think that was also these days that I thought, maybe we should have one or few where we say, these are our bigger stories. That doesn't mean that the other stories are not important.
No.
But it could be important, so you need to think maybe along those lines, to go, not go directly, but go indirectly.
Yes,
Another question.
So I also come from the Netherlands, so it's not that I want to disturb the dream, but is this very entrepreneurial way of thinking, let's say, is it not also at the basis for many of the problems in our country that we're facing today? So I just wonder, so I just wonder if we need to go to at least different values other than just making money, for example.
No, but I think what is important, because Michiel talked about the triple helix, but we are already at the quadruple helix and we go to the quintuple helix. So, but I think that profitability and sustainability can go in hand, but then we need new business models, and that's why we need to have the industry in, because if they are outside, we never have the good debate with it. You can question whether you should have profitability in any case, but let's assume. So by working together, maybe you can address it in another way. But like Fred said, science is also very important. So we need also funding for science. And you need funding sources for definitely.
Yeah, if I may add,
that you also need a strong government, and I mean the problems that you maybe are hinting to are the privatization of public sector.
Yeah, the agricultural sector, it's an enormous crisis.
Yeah, but
and as a result of the fact that profit was the only driver for so many years.
well, I completely agree with you. That's something we're looking into. But at the basis of this approach is the realization that for any substantial societal turnover or change, you need all societal groups, relevant groups engaged.
Yeah.
That's the basis of this
That's what I
approach.
meant by dream. I mean, seeing those sectors working together, and we can add all other, like instead of 3, 5 elixes. Yes. The difficulty is making them working together towards a common goal. That's what it means.
And I have just another question about the communication piece. So, I guess, because communication needs to happen at so many different levels, right? It's within and among those institutions, but it's also, I don't know if it has to be also then to policymakers and government officials to say that this is a worthwhile, this structure is worthwhile and we can keep going, then also out to the public. So do you work at all of those levels and try to send those messages at all those levels, or how does that work?
Yes, well, speaking for the convergence of those universities, it's really at the beginning, and we see that communication is really a challenge. What we try to do is developing a community so that everyone feels he or she belongs to this community. And what you can do from a top level is creating the conditions for people to buy in. So by seeding money or subsidies or projects or things like that. But it has to grow. It really takes, I think, 10 years before those initiatives fully are connected, even within each other.
And so do you think that I know we've just talked about how you transfer this model to other countries. Do you see that there are are other countries doing this model in Europe or elsewhere, or where do you see there's, I guess, the most opportunity?
Well, I would say that the European Union itself is working along those lines, inviting all stakeholders of any issue to become a part of the discussion in their field. So you always have to call for interests, and even the companies that are it's almost lobbying towards consensus.
If I can add to that, there are, within Europe, we see that there are other funding schemes that are similar. They might have a little bit of a different flavor to it, but very often you see the need for industrial parties, academic parties, governmental parties. Sometimes it has more of a regional perspective, so it has to be within a particular region or it has to be within a particular topic, but we see this happening in more places as well.
And even what is important is that we have a variety of programs, because even there are programs for cities to work together on sustainability or health issues or biodiversity or park issues. And so it's difficult, but if you look through, there is possible to have on several levels to work with. And I want to add one thing to your question. I think what I have noticed, and I've done a lot of projects, a lot of partnerships, communication is always somewhere at the end.
Yeah.
And I think it might be important to put it at the beginning and say, okay, what is the story we are going to tell? How are we going to tell it? That we need sufficient money to do that. I don't want to say call Disney, but it helps if there is a good movie or Richard Attenborough to do that. But that costs a lot of money. And you can say, yeah, but you have to put that money in research. But in the end, the money you put in that activity might be as important as funding research or innovation or public-private partnerships. And that's also something we need to realize more. What are the tipping points in what we want to achieve and what do we need for that particular action? So that's also something what I think has to be more important and has to be addressed right now.
And we didn't want to present this as saying, okay, this is the only way forward,
No.
because in a lot of different contexts this won't work. We just wanted to present the Dutch approach as a possible way of organizing the backbone of the Planetary Health Alliance. Maybe even in a part, but at least consider it.
And I could add to that, I've been in a lot of international consortia, even had breakfast with Francis Collins, and he always said to me, well, if you don't bring 20 million, I don't want to talk with you. I said, well, dollars or euros? So it is possible, and I think what might be an idea, and you really have to think about it, you need a funders meeting. And I know how difficult it is, because I've done it. But you have to get these people also at the table, because they will fund in their country or whatever, and that's important. And that was lacking a little bit, I think, but it's just an observation. But if you have most international consortia, there are funders groups. And they also want to be part of your discussion and your debate, instead of that you tell them you have to do this and that, because then it's no problem. It's not invented by me. So consider a funders group and a funders group meeting. Start small. I mean, you don't have 40 funders at one time, but you can start small and take it from there, and then learn from them and try to get them involved in the financial cycles you have to organize in the future. I think that's important as well. Anyway.
Excuse me.
Yeah, just a short question. Yeah, I was just curious, coming from academia, if there's also in this program something in place to, let's say, stimulate the input of early career researchers. Because also looking at the slides, it seems that it's really taking well-established networks as a starting point.
Well, we do have an extensive program for PhD students, if that's what you mean. Yeah, that's more towards the fundamental side of the research, of course. But we do have, you know, we're quite active in capacity building and education.
People having the hardest time are really in the Netherlands are really the people that are just, let's say, at the postdoc level, try to start to get a position in the university.
Yeah.
So it would be good to have, to have at least something going on to have some special attention for that.
Okay.
Because I see that all around.
Okay. Well, we can always look into that. Yeah.
Any other questions, remarks? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.